Hi guys, welcome back. This is the flight part of the number 8 most extreme airport, the flight into Eagle County Regional Airport. As you can see, we have set up the airplane a few miles from the Kimball IAF. We are flying there on a heading of 199. We are at 14,000 feet and we're looking good so far. Let me talk real quick about GPS approaches. As you can see on one of our displays, we have the flight path and we have the points there for the GPS, a typical thing for an airliner. But for GPS navigation, what we really need to do is that we need to put the airplane in a GPS mode. If we look at the other display over here, we can see that this time we're using the HSI, or the display of the HSI, almost like a VOR gauge. This is directly out of my GPS navigation tutorial part 3 using the HSI gauge for GPS navigation. You should go take a look at it just so you get an idea of what's going on, because I'm not going to get into that much detail this time. For this approach, because we are landing at a high altitude airport in the mountains, I've set up the weather with some high winds, some high turbulence, some wind shear, and at the same time all those winds, depending on our altitudes and where we are, should act almost like crosswinds. So for this approach, we're going to see a lot of crabbing into the wind, in some cases as much as 15 degrees into the wind to maintain our heading. Okay, we're getting pretty close to our IAF Kimball. At IAF Kimball, we are going to change our heading to a heading of 184. Okay, there we go. And at the same time, as we're turning to a heading of 184, we're going to start a descent from 14,000 feet down to 12,000 feet. By the time we reach our next point, Powers, we should be at 12,000 feet and we should maintain that altitude of 12,000 feet. Another thing I want to talk about is, look how much wind correction we have put in. We have almost 10 or 12 degrees of wind correction just to stay on the flight path. Now, let's talk a little bit about flying in severe turbulence. When flying in severe turbulence, the most important thing we need to do is that we need to fly the airplane at or below maneuvering speed. Every airplane has its own maneuvering speed. The maneuvering speed of an airplane depends a lot on the weight of the airplane. If the airplane is fully loaded, the maneuvering speed will be higher, and if the airplane is almost empty, the maneuvering speed will be lower. If we don't fly the airplane at or below maneuvering speed in severe turbulence, the airplane can get stressed out so much that it will actually fall apart. The last time this happened, that was a couple years back. There was an Air France Airbus that was flying, I believe, from Brazil back to France, ran into some severe turbulence. At the same time, apparently there was a airspeed indicator failure. There was some blockage. So what the airspeed indicator was showing was a airspeed that was lower than the actual airspeed. The airplane was going a lot faster than what the pilots thought. And because of that, once the plane hit that turbulence, that severe turbulence, that extra speed was enough to have the airplane fall apart. As we reach the point Powers at 12,000 feet, we're going to start a nice right turn to a heading of 237 to our next point AWAC. At the same time, we're going to start the descent from 12,000 feet down to 11,100 feet. Although it looks like we're breaking out of the clouds right now, it's very important that we keep our eyes inside. One of the worst things we can do is have our eyes shift from outside to the inside. I can tell you this from experience. When I was flying under the hood, my concentration was solely on the inside instruments. The first time I flew into IFR IMC conditions and I flew into the cloud, my eyes naturally went up and started looking around, and I was inside the clouds and I didn't realize what was happening to the airplane. And I would have stalled the airplane if it wasn't for my instructor at that time, who took his hand and just pushed the yoke down and said, "What the hell are you doing? Keep your eyes inside." So it is very important that when we're flying on instruments, we keep our eyes on the inside. Let's forget about the outside, let's keep our eyes on the inside. We're going to keep our scan going. We get into a rhythm and we pay attention to our instruments. When the time comes, we'll get our eyes outside and we'll switch to visual, but while we're in IMC conditions, our eyes should be on the inside the whole time. Okay, we're coming up on the point AWAC. AWAC, remember, is our final approach fix. This is where we're going to put our landing gear down, and this is where we would do our pre-landing checklist. The altitude is looking good, the airspeed is looking good. Okay, we are over the point AWAC, landing gear down. Let's start a descent down to 9,860 feet, and we're going to start looking for that runway like crazy right now. We want to switch to visual as fast as we can because we have to do that steep descent, remember? And as you can see, we can see the runway, so we're immediately going to switch to visual flying from this point. We're not going to pay attention to the approach plate anymore. We're going to switch to visual flying. We're going to start that steep descent down to intercept the PAPI glide slope lights, but at the same time we're going to pay attention to our airspeed. We don't want to pick up too much airspeed. Now, since we've switched to visual, let me talk a little bit about approaches for landings in severe turbulence. First of all, because the air is thinner at higher altitudes, our ground speed is going to be faster. This is basic physics 101. So that means our landing run is going to be longer. Also, in severe turbulence, like we have right now, especially in wind gust conditions, we want our approach speed to be about 10 knots higher. The higher approach speed will not affect the airplane in any other way except that our flare will be longer. So keeping in mind that we're at a high altitude airport where our ground speed is already faster and we have to come in about 10 knots faster than we usually would anyway, we should expect our landing run to be 2,000 to 3,000 feet longer than it usually would be. Now for this landing we do have a lot of crosswind, and I have stayed on the high side for the most part, and usually in high altitude airports where the air is thinner, we'd rather be on the high side. That's just another thing to keep in mind. So far it's looking good. The wind and turbulence is really bouncing us around right now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to concentrate on landing this airplane fully at this point. Just remember, all the adjustments will be minor adjustments, and at airports like these, extreme airports, there's really no need to take a chance. If it's not there, we can go around and come back and try to do it again. Always keep that in mind. We can always go around, come back, and land again. There's no shame in a go around. There is never shame in a go around. Always keep that in mind.
Sink rate, sink rate. 100.
Okay, so the landing wasn't too bad. It was a little bit off the center line, but for these conditions it's very acceptable. Let's take a look at our flight path. You can see where we came into Kimball. We turned at Powers, AWAC, and then pretty much from AWAC we did pick up the airport visually and did a visual approach into Vail Airport.
200. Sink rate, sink rate. 100.